collection and how designers go about designing collections and how one starts to develop the skills of thinking like a designer and then how principles of design and elements of design are applied to both full collections but also individual garments. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and I realized that how useful that is. I'm not interested in developing a whole collection, although I certainly find that looking at someone's collection, I find that very useful as a way to sort of begin to understand how people think in terms of design work. And I'll show you some pictures of what really kind of has caught my eye lately. So, but I also realized what a smart way it is to start to think about garments, and rather than just sort of going, just taking what's in front of you from a commercial pattern, or also always sort of leaning towards the things that you're most interested. So I've been trying to develop a design process for myself, and I found these really helpful. So what we're going to do today is really just do an overview of these various features and how they look in garments. And I tried to pick a range of things for us to look at, and I have, unfortunately I don't have a document projector, but I do have several visuals, and so I'll hold them up while I'm talking about them and then pass them around so you can get a closer look at them. I will say that I spend, in terms of doing research for garments and sewing, I do spend a lot of hours researching, and I do, part of that again has been my pattern making training, because we had to do I don't know what we call in theater a morgue, where we had to gather a whole collection of sleeves, collars, necklines, style lines, all those kinds of things, and skirts. And I do that on Pinterest because there's so much work there. So I have a board for everyone. And so I spend a lot of time just researching and looking at things. And then if I see something that's interesting, then I go to look at the collection, and then I get ideas. And some of these things are really so far out there that, I mean, I'd never wear them, but there's always a detail or a way of thinking about an element of design that in the end becomes useful to me. And so over the years, I've been able to refine my own aesthetic, and some of these things are not within what I particularly like or what is my aesthetic. But I have to tell you how much I admire some of the things that I happen to see. So a lot of this is just the images that I have for you, just sort of things that have caught my eye. And they're certainly not the definitive images or examples for any of these various elements, but they are useful to look at. Okay, so what I have here for you is a handout, and I will say that I've adapted this, not a lot, but a little bit, and expanded on a little bit from Susie Furr's. So this is really Susie Furr's work from Apparel Arts and the Pattern Making Intensives, and the citations below. So elements of design are kind of the big ideas, and are typically the first things that one really notices when you look at a garment or you look at a collection. And so the first one, I think you always, and if you saw the shirt presentation that I did a month ago at Toujours Couture, I talked about silhouettes. It still holds here. The first thing you see and you notice in a garment is a silhouette. And silhouette is, one can think about that as the overall shape of the garment. Susie describes it as volume or lack of volume, not to be confused with ease. That's something else. So if you were to look at a garment and draw and just put it up against the window with a sheet of paper over and draw the edges of it, you would get the silhouette. All right. And there are some sort of basic silhouettes that we see kind of frequently, and here are some examples. This one here, this silhouette, this is an Armani, has a kind of it's sort of, it's close here, not much volume here, but you can see how much volume there is there. This is a Balenciaga. It's from the 50s, but you can so perfectly see that column silhouette. Even though your eye might be drawn to this detail here, you can clearly see that. Okay, this is quite easy to see, and you can see that it broadens at the top and then brings the column. So in a way, it sort of has an hourglass kind of curvy effect. And this one, clearly, there's no question what that silhouette is, and quite fun. You might wear it, but I think it's a really fun. And if you look at it, then and let your eye not be caught up by the stripes, which I find really fun to look at. You can see this, and I'm just realizing this. If you turn these things backwards, you skewer. You really could see the silhouette. I was trying to find a silhouette that was wide on the top and narrowed on the bottom and continued, that didn't have, this is a little bit, but what it does though is it comes in and goes out again, so it has a more sort of hourglass silhouette. So it was sort of hard to find. However, we have lived with these. Those of you that are of my sort of vintage will definitely remember this look from the 80s. Oh, yeah. Really see the silhouette of the breadth that comes down. Now, that's not to say we don't have this today, but I think that this kind of silhouette is achieved in a different way today. This is a Chanel from the spring, and this is a Del Pozo from, I think it's 16 or 17, and this Del Pozo is from the fall. And what you notice about all of these silhouettes, these particularly are quite architectural. But what you notice is that this wider silhouette is in many ways achieved not by expanding the shoulder pads out here, but rather by shaping the sleeves.
Okay, turn it the other way.
Yeah, you can see that.
Is caught by shaping the sleeves. So these are just examples, but especially if you look at this one here, the first thing you can see how dominant the silhouette is. And while you might say, well, I'll never wear that. I mean, that's kind of a little too dramatic for me. The fact is indeed you might, but you might change the scale of it. So anyway, I'll pass these around. So if you just keep these together. Now, this I found in Threads magazine as I was cleaning out magazines, and I think it is a really good example of how to think about a silhouette for yourself. That regardless of body type, if we're not happy with our bodies, we tend to overdress them. So you want to obscure. And that I don't think that applies to just people who feel like they have more, they're more Rubenesque or they have more curves. But I've also seen this with women who are quite thin. And you would say, well, that woman wear anything. They are not happy for whatever reason. And of course, I come from the world of dance, and we know that there's a whole pathology associated with body type there. And we struggle with it. But there's a tendency to obscure. So this is an example. I can't remember who did this article. I can't remember. It's from Threads 17 of examples of. They're calling this examples of ease, but let ease go for a moment and look at these as three different silhouettes. Now, one can make the assumption that this dress form is the same size, and look what happens to the dress form with each of those. So now let's talk a little bit about the question of ease. Is that this is described as close fitting. It's not what I would I'd say this is fitted. I would not call it close fitting necessarily, but it could be close fitting with more ease. But you see what happens in my personal opinion, is I do not think this is a very attractive silhouette for most women, regardless of how you sort of think about your own proportions. It just isn't a very attractive The garment, first of all, isn't attractive. As my friend Stuart would say, well, it looks like that garment's wearing the girl. The other thing, too, is that as Susie often says, even if you want to make a garment like this, adjust the ease, she says, so that you know that there's a body under there.
Absolutely.
That you know that there is a body. And so anyway, I thought those were really good examples of that. Now, this is something I found. These are this is a collection of Caroline Herrera white blouses, shirts and blouses, however you choose to design that. And I have this love of shirts, so I'm always on the lookout for it. But this you look at, and you can really see the different silhouettes and how you might use this as a kind of template for thinking about what silhouette. If I was to choose 2 blouses from here, what would I choose? So, isn't that great? Of course, it's against black and white, so you really see it.
Yeah.
And it's even clearer here because you obscure the details. This is a great idea. I didn't think about that. You hold it up against the light. Yeah, you get the light behind it. Yeah. So, you could probably guess which ones I would choose. I mean, that's pretty obvious. But there are, this is a nice way to think about this and what it does to the body. All right. Okay, so that's silhouette. Now, the next thing we look at is line. And line are the seam lines of a garment. They're achieved often by seam lines, trims, pleats, anything that creates a line in a garment. You've got horizontal lines, vertical lines, which jump out at you right away. There's curves, so a garment that's got curved lines, but they are literally lines, and you see them. This example here, I picked 2 Chanel jackets, the kind of iconic one, and then a more contemporary view of it. So you see this you recognize immediately as the lines of a classic Chanel jacket. And Coco Chanel, you see that classic picture of her sitting like this, Coco Chanel, and she's sitting like this in her jacket. So these are the lines. It's there. And then we've kind of continued, and people who like to sew these, they like to capture that. But this is also a Chanel jacket. It has the same fabrication, meaning the tweed and the high contrast between the trim there. All right. Now, you can see this is a coat that the lines are created. The lines are created by the seam lines, but also how the seam lines are trimmed out. So this is a pretty full shape. And then this jacket, you can see that what shapes the dimension of it are these kind of diagonal lines, and amplified with the silhouette.
Yeah.
And then the funnel neck. But this is really where we see the lines. All right. So there's one. Now, these you'll have to see closer, I think. But I thought this jacket was a really good example of how the lapel on a jacket creates the line. The silhouette is a plain jacket silhouette. If you look at it like this, it looks like a jacket that many of us probably have sewn and have in our closets. But this is what creates the line. And I think it's a really great example of a very sort of simple, straightforward, beautifully articulately designed jacket that is not over-designed and it's not under-designed. And what this does. Now, this is a jacket that creates a horizontal and a vertical line. These horizontal lines, vertical lines, and they do something to the body in a particular way. And this is from, I think, the 60s. It's either late, I want to say it's late 60s, but I don't think it's as late as early 70s. I think it's late 60s. It's in the era where we wear dresses and coats. And do any of you follow the blog 50 Dresses?
Mm-hmm.
And did you see the piece she wrote about? She was reflecting on dresses and coats and how beautiful it is to have like this sort of wear a dress and have a coat to match.
Mm-hmm.
And so I read that, and then the next day I was looking for these images and I found this. But you can see in this case, the seam lines create the lines. Mm-hmm. And it's amplified in the dress. Mm-hmm. So you have a nice sort of sense of the whole working together. So I think these are examples of lines, and how you put lines in a garment, particularly if it's a solid color garment, is what gives it design interest. Can I use you as an example?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Not your prison woman's dress, prison nature dress. Yeah, beautiful fabric. Yeah, there was a Cheryl did a dress, and she was going to put this beading on, and it just didn't reach for her. It's a great example of your beautiful fabric. The silhouette is nice, but it's under designed.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking, because that was the words when we were texting. You said like under design.
Yeah, and I think that you could fix that by adding line. You get ribbon and put it on the outside of it. I mean, inside, but you don't have to cut it apart. But if you were going to do that dress again from the beginning, you could decide where you want some lines to go and cut them apart, add seam lines, put it back together, and then put piping in there maybe. Mm-hmm. So you take a dress that you like that silhouette, you like that sleeve, but and particularly the fabric too contributes to that. But it's a tricky thing to do, but that would be a way to sort of start with that. Yeah.
Well, the thing that surprised me.
But I do think it would be fun to take that dress and do something with it. You could keep it all one color. You could find some blue ribbon. I mean, I don't think it's destined for the bin. Okay, texture. Texture is exactly what you think it is. It's related to how the materials are used and how it alters the surface texture of a garment. So, can you see these? Can you see through here? You probably can't see this one because it's light, right? But you can see that you recognize the silhouette. And there isn't much going on. There's little lines here. But when you flip it over, you can see the texture of this fabric and how fabulous this very basic silhouette looks, and these vertical, horizontal lines, sorry. And then this one, how the fabric has been used to create surface texture. I think that's a really nice design. And then this is probably an art to wear coat, but you can see how things have been added on. And sometimes you go to workshops, you think, oh my God, I'd never do that. I'm not going to put all that, But then you think, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe I could take that one little idea and apply it to something. I mean, you never. And then, of course, this is a Chanel, and the beading. Just the sheer amount of beading on that, how it changes the surface texture. Anytime you put just beading, any kind of beading, or anytime you put like a ribbon designs or trim, you've altered the texture of the garment, and that again creates style interest. This is also a really nice example of texture, this one that I circled here. And this is a very smooth fabric, and you can imagine how if the whole garment was created out of that it wouldn't sort of have any dimension. And you could see once this is used, just like this here, when you get these up close, you can sort of see the push and pull of the space with the texture, that the texture brings this closer to you and this recedes, but the stripes keep it alive and active. So you can think of how this pushes and pulls the space and provides, you can sort of, it provides dimension, whereas this makes it completely flat. And then also how it's really dense here and then becomes much less dense as it goes up to it completely goes away. So And the same thing here with that. And then I think this is also another example of this is really dense texture, and then this is less as it goes up. All right. So take a look at these and what this does to how near or how far you feel from the garment, and where the garment tends to advance and how it tends to retreat. And that's a result of how the texture is used. And then where you put that texture also has a lot to do with what part of the body will advance. This, on a large-breasted woman, on the breast probably might not be the look we would tend to go for, but who knows? And so I think that these are nice examples of I thought texture.
Penny, remember the white dress that I oogled over that Mary Ray did with the things?
Yes.
Is that texture?
Yes.
Or line?
Both.
Or both?
Both.
Okay.
It's I think it's texture particularly because of it changes the whole sort of surface features. It changes the surface of the garment, but the texture also creates the line. You could see here how this texture doesn't really create a line. I mean, it does sort of, but it's really not like this line. Right. So yeah, they work together. Now, you have to remember these things don't exist in isolation, and that the silhouette and then the line and the texture all work together to create the design of the garment. So if you're walking through Neiman Marcus and you see something on the rack on a mannequin that catches your eye and you walk right over to it, if you try to figure out what is it about that garment that's catching your eye, is it just a silhouette that you love because you like to wear those kinds of clothes, or is it the treatment on it that catches your eye, and how does it all work together? So, okay, now those are sort of the basic elements of the design. They're there, they're present, they are kind of the bold features. Now, let's move on to the principal design.